Good evening. I would like to call this regular meeting of the Board of Education to order. The next regular Board of Education meeting is on Tuesday, October 8th at 7:30 p.m. in the board meeting room. In starting, I'd just like to take a moment to offer our most sincere condolences to our neighbors in New Canaan for their loss of a young student. We wish them some peace as they navigate the coming days. Alan will talk a little bit more about the district's work in that area for our students and our neighbors. Beyond that, I don't have any additional remarks this evening, so I will move to public comment.
Good evening. If anybody in person would like to participate in public comment, please come up to the podium and wait for the chair to recognize you. Please state your name and address for the record, and you will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Please note the time with the chair. If anybody online would like to participate, please use the raised hand icon. We have no raised hands at this time.
Okay, thank you. With that, I'll move to the superintendent's report. Dr. Adley.
Good evening, everyone. Special welcome this morning, or today, sorry, to Amanda Witzel from the National School Climate Centre. Thank you for being with us, Amanda. As the Madam Chair has shared, we extend our condolences to our colleagues, friends, staff, family members, and our neighbours in New Canaan on the tragic loss of their high school student. I would like to thank our own staff at the high school. When these things happen, the borders are just that, a border of a town. It's a local region. It impacts all of us. We've experienced a lot of loss during this time, and our own students have felt this. And I'd like to thank our Director of Mental Health, Dr. Dad, and also under the leadership of Alan Dunn, the high school staff in particular for reaching out, providing services to our young people at the high school, which will be ongoing, and particularly to the hockey community. We extend our condolences to our kids and also to the New Canaan community. We will continue to reach out. We will also continue to provide services and opportunities to heal with our own students. So thank you. We continue to work closely. There's no easy transition from that topic. We continue to work closely with the local police department on any reports that we have received regarding vehicles that have stopped and talked to kids either on the way in or the way home from school. From a board perspective, the Cape Caps Convention, just want to remind you, it's 15th through the 18th. Your early bird discount will end on October 13th. So if you have a wee opportunity with your calendars, I would encourage you to join us. I want to thank the parents and staff for all the open houses. That most recently, since the last meeting, we've had the secondary open houses, and they were absolutely packed. It was wonderful to see people try and navigate around those buildings, get the classes on time and so on. But it's a testament to support for education and for the staff in the town. The HHR schools celebrated Construction Workers Appreciation Week last week with letters and cards and various signs. It's my understanding the steel beam sign-in at the schools is this Friday, and we will have beam risings on Monday. So the kids will have a fun time doing that. I want to congratulate our 9 DHS students, to Nathan, John, Kylie, Arohan, Maha, Lucas, Rajiv, Natalie, Charlotte, and Lauren. These are our semi-finalists in the 2025 National Merit Scholarship Program. So many congratulations as they move forward in the process. Parents should have received their individual reports for students, their children, on the SBAC assessments. And you should also have received no later than yesterday the video instructions in terms of how to interpret the data.
Alan, just FYI, some of the mail has been a little slow for some folks. So if you haven't received it, I think it's still on the way.
Okay, thank you. Good reminder. Thank you. I did report out that so far so good with the KD8 cell phone practices. For the want of a better term, there have been 3 violations at the elementary school and with approximately 30 at the middle school. But given we have had 19 days of school and over 1,000 kids, I think that's pretty good. Most of them have been in the gym area or between classes at the middle school. I did communicate with the board that in October we will be surveying faculty, staff, and students regarding the implementation of the K through 8. I'll call it cell phone policy, but mobile personal device policy. We have established or are establishing a committee. We have established dates for the committee to meet for the high school. Both of those presentations, updates to the boards are on the master agenda. One for update in early November about the survey that will be administered in October, and then in early January, because anticipated if there is a new policy or otherwise will go in place for the second semester. It's going to take that time to actually do this thoughtfully and plan accordingly. So those are both on the master agenda for this evening. Thursday is the first concert. They're all together for this one, I think. The choir, the chorus, the orchestra, they'll all be together. It's a fun time, just a showcase of what to come. So if you're so inclined to have it, and your calendar is available for Thursday evening at 7 o'clock. Just a reminder, the next Thursday to your parents and families, like October 3rd, schools will be closed in observance of Rosh Hashanah, and wishing all those that celebrate a Happy New Year. Just a wee early reminder, nod to the elementary conferences that are in October. That's October 22nd to 25th. And a reminder to the board and certainly to the high school that the final NIAS preparations are underway for their visit, which is October 20th through the 23rd. There is no facilities meeting on Friday, this Friday, 9/27. And the next curriculum committee meeting is on October 2nd, and the communications October 4th. And that concludes the announcements.
Okay, thank you very much. Student representative reports, Brenna.
Good evening. It's so hard to believe that we're almost nearing that halfway point of the first quarter. It's really flown by, I must say, for a DHS community. We recently just celebrated our very successful open house for both the middle school and the high school, as well as our field hockey team and football team, who've had an outstanding record this season. And again, a big shout out to all of our fall sports teams. And as Dr. Adley mentioned, this Thursday night will be our official DHS musical fall all ensemble concert. We've got, not to spoil the program, but we've got everything from a barbershop quartet to our wind ensemble to our concert and chamber orchestra and our jazz band. So it's going to be a really special event. And unlike many other musical performances, a very short event. So we invite all to come, and all are welcome as usual in this great celebration of all that our district has to offer for us.
Thank you, Brenna. Okay, approval of the minutes. May I have a motion to approve the minutes of the regular meeting held on September 10th, 2024? That is Sarah, seconded by Julie. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you. Board committee reports. Now that we have John.
Last Thursday, we met on the Finance Committee. We discussed the early fiscal year 25 budget update and a few transfers, which the committee recommended to approve, which Rich will be covering later. We're running a small deficit already, but that's largely associated with the loss of a federal grant. And Rich, during the meeting, said there's going to be some offsets likely in the next monthly report.
What else, Julie?
Thank you. The policy committee met last Tuesday, the 17th. We reviewed a number of policies that will be coming to the full board, I believe scheduled for the October 8th board meeting, and the next committee meeting is October 15th.
Thank you. Okay. Presentations, discussions, and possible action. We'll start with the climate survey, Dr. Dad.
Good evening. On behalf of the administrative team, I know Dr. Adley just welcomed Amanda, but I would also like to extend a welcome to Amanda Weitzel, who's going to share with us some of the preliminary results from the school climate survey. Amanda is currently Director of Survey Operations with the National School Climate Center, and I have to say she has been, from the onset, incredibly responsive to any of our questions, support, insight that she has from a decade or so experience in this field. So I appreciate you being here. And I realize that all of you have received a memo that accompanies the presentation. So I'm just going to summarize that memo with a couple of highlights. Just for the context of the school climate survey, in July of 2023, there was a state general statute that updated previous legislation regarding the administration of the school climate survey. And in that update, they said that beginning next year biannually, we'll have to administer a school climate survey to students, staff, and families. And what will happen with that information is that will then be integrated, and each school must submit a school climate improvement plan, with this being one data point. So beginning in the summer of 2023, we got together a small group of administrators to explore some options that we had for the school climate survey. We talked to some neighboring districts to see what surveys they used, any feedback they had, the responsiveness of the vendors, the feasibility and the ease of use, and the data that was provided. And so we ended up with the National School Climate Center and have been very happy with the response and the collaboration. So before the administration of the survey last spring, there were a couple steps leading up to the planning of it. Parents were given an option to opt out, as part of the legislation recommends, and we did have about 3% of parents that opted out. We also provided opportunity for teachers to have a little bit of information about how to administer the test. The test itself, the survey took about 20 minutes, a little bit longer for some of our younger kids, but we gave them some materials, some opportunities for consultation about how to administer the digital version of the assessment. We worked closely with Jeff Adams. He did a great job in terms of how this would roll out for our kids. And in general, I have to say the rollout and the administration went pretty seamlessly. In general, the feedback from the administrators and teachers were positive with the ease of use. Again, like I mentioned, the younger kids needed a little bit more time, and they needed a little bit of clarification on some of the language or how to use the Likert scale. So we aggregated some of that feedback, and we'll be working with the teachers on that. So this is really, we've gotten the data. The next steps include, we did a preliminary data dive in our administrative retreat in June, where we broke up into small groups and just started to look at the general data. The data is very nuanced. You can go in by school, you can go in by grade level. When you're looking at staff, you can go in by years of teaching experience. So the next steps are that as every school climate team convenes, they're going to do a deeper dive into their specific school data. From there, they will create a school climate improvement plan that has to be submitted to myself by December 31st. So that's kind of where we are. They're in the process. I know at least one team has already met, and they've talked about focusing on things like being an upstander versus a bystander, not only based on some of the data, but just based on other pieces of data, whether that's student feedback, teacher feedback. And then in the spring, we will give the survey again, and we will reassess, and then we'll continue that process of assessing, reevaluating, and looking at progress that we've made. So I'm going to turn it over to Amanda to share some of the data, and at the end, we will be happy to take any questions.
Hey, thank you, Dr. Dad. Can everybody hear me okay? Great. So yeah, like just mentioned, I'm here to give some preliminary findings to the district data of the Comprehensive School Climate Inventory, or CSCI. Before I do that, I do want to give a little bit of background about the National School Climate Center, just to contextualize a little bit about some of the work that we do. We are a nonprofit organization founded out of Columbia University in 1996. We work with schools nationally and a bit globally as well to really create safe and supportive learning environments for students, staff, and families by way of providing technical assistance, support, school climate measurement, research and evaluation, and policy advocacy. A few things about our organization. We are research driven, and I'll get into the research-based tool in just a moment, but it is field tested, valid, and reliable, our CSCI. And it's really focused on the student experience. We've administered the CSCI to about 2.3 million students, staff, and families since 2007. And we do engage with the entire school community, as those are the key stakeholders. So students, staff, and families learning what their perceptions are. We also have an ongoing relationship with Special Olympics Unified Champion Schools. We've worked with them collaborating over research projects and what does school climate look like in terms of social inclusion and developing social inclusion measurement tools. We provide personalized technical support to schools and districts. So really from the beginning of survey administration in terms of outreach, how can we get as much voice as possible, all the way through the reporting phase and board presentations. Like I mentioned, we are a nonprofit organization. We have about 30 years experience providing research-based school climate measurement and school climate improvements. We've also trained state leaders through school climate leadership and improvements overall as well. Okay, so a bit of an overview about today. I do want to go into a little bit about our approach to school climate. I'll give you a bit of background about the CSCI itself. I'll go into those results and then I'll talk through some recommendations and next steps that we would recommend. So starting out with our approach, before we dive into that, starting out with the definition of school climate and how we define it is the school climate is the quality and character of school life. So it's based on student, staff, and family perceptions of norms, goals, values, relationships, teaching and learning practices, and organizational structures. And what a positive school climate is, it's when students, staff, and families all have access to emotional and physical safety, high expectations for teaching and learning, those caring relationships, and multiple pathways to participate and connect in school life. Okay. So here are our 5 domains. Within those 5 domains are our dimensions, 14 dimensions, and we'll be going over those scores in just a few slides. But I want to set a little bit of a framework here. So we have those 5 domains, and those are safety, teaching and learning. You can see those dimensions underneath them. Interpersonal relationships, the institutional environment, and the last domain is for staff only, which is measuring administration and leadership and collective efficacy. So like I said, we'll go into those scores in just a moment. A little bit of background about the Comprehensive School Climate Inventory, or again, CSCI. So like I stated, the CSCI has been administered to 2.3 million students, staff, and families. It is confidential and anonymous, so we're not asking any email addresses, student IDs, and it is administered to students, staff, and families. It was really developed as a holistic tool to gain those perceptions from the 3 school community members across those 14 dimensions. It is research developed, and I'll go into some of that in a few slides coming up. But really the goal of it is to provide each school a report. What are some of the strengths and areas for improvement? How can you look at the detailed demographic information to disaggregate by different subgroups that are available? Okay, this next slide talks through the research-based CSCI. It's been rigorously validated tool to accurately assess overall school climate. So its domains, its dimensions, its items have been used decades worth of theoretical and empirical research that accurately measure those critical aspects of those 5 domains I had just mentioned. The items developed have been developed and refined throughout the years, including cognitive interviews, focus groups, factor analyses, Cronbach alphas, and test-retest reliability assessments. It consistently yields those results over time and across educational settings. There's also been conformatory factor analyses across those 12 dimensions for students and families and those 14 dimensions for staff. And it's also been, independent scholars have also found it to be valid and reliable as well. Oops. All right, a little bit more about our specific reach. So I had mentioned how many times the CSCI has been administered. Since 2001, we've worked with 25 districts in the tri-state area. This chart below on the second portion of the slide is student, staff, and families, the number of surveys that have been administered to each of those population groups across the past 3 years. You'll see some differences in numbers here. This last school year 23-24, have mostly mirrored our historical numbers. After COVID, we saw some changes like we did elsewhere in school life. So we're now feeling we're back on track and seeing those numbers more normally reflected here. Okay, before we get into the actual data and the scores, knowing who is part of the data set is important. So this top chart shows by the district, the response rates across students, staff, and families. And then it shows the school differences in terms of response rates underneath it. Typically, we recommend 85 to 100% completion, really with the goal of getting as much voice as possible. So you'll see some of those, again, differences at the specific school levels. For families, we typically recommend 30 to 40%. However, to even see schools specifically at a secondary level get into the double digits can be a celebration. So even specifically Holmes Elementary School, learning more about their process and how they engaged with families would be interesting, but overall, the response rates, particularly from families, are a great starting point. So just thinking through, as we start to look at these data points, it's not representative of every student, staff, and family in the district, and that'll be important as you start to go down to the item levels and the subgroup information as well. Okay, a bit about the scoring. So each dimension receives a median score, and you'll see an example of that below on the slide. The scale is a 5-point scale. Anything above a 3.5 is in the positive range. A 2.5 to a 3.5 would be the neutral range, and anything below a 2.5 would be in the negative range. So as you start to look at those median scores that are in that center column, you'll see the respondent, the number of responses, and then that median score. Okay, so we're going to start to go into each of these by domain. So starting off with safety, there are 4 dimensions within the safety domain. Starting out, again, we can see the dimension listed on the left-hand side, followed by the respondent, number of responses, and the median score. Starting out with safety rules and norms, student scores are most positive about safety rules and norms. And what that can indicate is that there are consistent rules against physical harm, physical violence, verbal abuse, and harassment. So again, just looking at that score compared to students and staff for rules and norms, we're seeing that that's higher. Sense of physical security is the highest rated dimension across all populations within the safety domain. And what that shows is that students and adults feel safe from physical harm at the buildings. Staff are least positive about sense of social emotional security. This is a trend we see nationally, specifically for students, staff, and families. That's listed here. And what that can mean is some of the items for that dimension are students are kind to each other, students make fun of each other, students attempt students from not making fun of each other. So it'll be important to go down to the item level to learn a little bit more about the levels of agreement and disagreement for those items. Lastly, online safety, students are most positive about that, another common trend that we see. And that can be because students are more immersed online in terms of social media, right? If it's how they engage, they socialize, how they view entertainment, whereas perhaps staff and families have more of a critical view in terms of what are some of the challenges in terms of cyberbullying, mental health concerns, and distraction from academics. Okay, this next domain is teaching and learning. There are 2 dimensions within this domain. Staff scores are most positive about both of these dimensions, which makes a whole lot of sense. They are can directly influence these as they're closest to the curriculum and can influence the daily teaching instructions and practices. We're seeing that student scores align for both of these dimensions, support for academic learning, social emotional learning. So it'll be important to go into the subgroups to learn a little bit more if there's any differences by grade, for example. We're also seeing that family scores are more positive than students if we're just looking at support for academic learning. And some of the things I'm calling out here are ways that the district and the schools can start to think through what are some common themes and trends and patterns as you start to think through how can we start to identify some areas targeted for action and create those action plans and school climate improvement plans overall. Okay, interpersonal relationships. Right away, I want to call out teacher-student relationships. On a 5-point scale, staff give it a 4.8, which can indicate that staff feel there's supportive and caring relationships between adults and students. Again, these are the things you want to start thinking about as where can you really leverage your strengths? If there's good relationships in the buildings, how can you build off of that when you're, again, looking for those areas to improve upon? For peer relationships, we're also seeing some more alignment here. So there is a shared perception in terms of peer relationship. And this is a key element to a positive school climate. Research shows that when peers are supportive and have meaningful friendships at schools, they thrive academically. And then respect for diversity, we're seeing that these are all in the positive range, again, above that 3.5, which means there is respect for individual differences and that those differences are welcomed. Okay. Institutional environment, the three dimensions that are listed here. Family scores are most positive about physical surroundings. And what that dimension measures is how well resourced is the school? Is it clean? Is there up-to-date technology? Are there supplies available? School connectedness, also, again, these are all in the positive range. Again, remembering that 3.5 and above is that positive range. Again, indicating that the schools are welcoming places and really there's a sense of pride and cultivates belonging. The last dimension that is listed here, social inclusion. This is the scale that's been developed with Special Olympics. We're seeing that staff are most positive here. And that's also on trend, similar to those teaching and learning practices. If they are able to directly influence and encourage students of all abilities to develop friendships, their scores can be a bit higher. And that's what we're seeing here. And this dimension particularly measures how students with different abilities are accepted and treated throughout school life, in school life. Okay. Leadership and efficacy. There are two dimensions listed here. Again, these are only for staff, so we're just looking at the staff perceptions here. They are both in the positive range, with collective efficacy being slightly more positive at a 4.0 compared to a 3.6. And this talks about staff working effectively together, learning together in their supportive working environments. It's particularly important to view these dimensions by subgroup to learn differences by role, years experience at a particular school, as each of those components can have unique experiences with school life. Okay, and in terms of what's next, I know we just have a short amount of time with the data, but really unpacking the district results as well as the school level results, which I know some of them have started to do, and really start to focus on some of those common themes that are noted in this PowerPoint. And then thinking through other district and school level data, specifically data that you're consistently collecting already. So for example, attendance, graduation rates, disciplinary data, to really tell the full picture with all of the data that you have. Again, thinking through some of the strengths, like I said, those teacher-student relationships, that is the highest score across 14 dimensions for staff particularly. So again, how can you leverage some of those pieces? And then thinking through, again, those school climate improvement plans, action planning, and then determining when to collect future data. Specifically, if this data set isn't as represented as perhaps wanted, doing interviews and focus groups to add that qualitative piece to this quantitative piece can be helpful and let you hear from folks that you weren't able to have participate in this survey. And then I do just want to take a moment after looking at that data to zoom out. So this is our 5-stage school climate improvement process. And a lot of our work is centered around working with schools and districts to teach them a portion of this process. That way they can go back to schools and mirror and mimic, again, pulling out those trends, thinking through action steps, but really just remembering this is a part of the process, right? So we just finished that evaluation piece and we're heading into action planning, implementation, and then reevaluation. But again, just thinking that zoomed out scope can help a bit as you're looking at the data as well. And then lastly, I want to leave off with, we do have some action planning resources. And really what these are a series of worksheets that work in order to help identify an area targeted for action. How can you prioritize some of those actions, right? So what's something more immediate that you can do? What's something a bit more long-term that you need some planning around? And then we have some action planning templates as well.
Thank you, Amanda. Thank you. I'm sure I don't know if Dr. Dad or Amy has anything else to add to that, or do you want to open up for questions?
I think this is exciting to look through the data. I think when we started it in June, there's so many different ways to look at the data. And I think it's one of our tools to continue to look at, how we're creating a conducive environment for all of our students. And I appreciate Amanda's assistance with that. Happy to take any questions.
All right, I'll open it up to the board. Thank you all. Does anybody have any questions? Sarah?
I have a bunch of questions. Thank you for this. It's a really helpful to understand what this was. Dr. Dad, can you remind us who's on the individual school climate teams? Like, who does that consist of?
So there's a teacher representative, there is administration, there's a parent representative. There's also a student, depending on the age, and we might have the student join for part and then come out. So it's a range of teachers and other paraprofessionals. It's a wide range.
Thank you. And I guess one of my big questions is, when you go into this data, I would think it would be really interesting to drill down into the individual schools to see the differences of, how that works. But I'm also kind of wary of that in a way. I'm just thinking, and I'm not calling anybody out at all, but if one school's their leadership team falls short, versus another school, how do you handle that? And how do you do that in a way that is effective and positive in terms of, the Smith school is horrible. How do you handle that?
So I go to the school climate meetings in each building, not every time, but I introduced what the school climate survey was when we were first going to do that. I've also gone to the climate meetings to talk about some of the data. And then twice a year, we also bring together, there's a school climate specialist meeting, which it consists of all the administrators from across the buildings, where we go through what's the structure of your climate plan, what does it need to look like. So having the more ongoing, at least at a minimum twice a year, bringing everyone together so that there's consistency among the buildings, I think is important. And that's something we do every year.
And I also think it would be important to do elementary and secondary and separate those out too, because those are very different experiences. Sorry, I interrupted.
No, you didn't. I just wanted to mention that it's important. I think I appreciate the question, because underlying the question is the idea of transparency of feedback. And also a wee bit of vulnerability. And it's important that as a board, the board functions in that capacity, the senior administration functions in the capacity of trying to understand the data, working with it, not using any of the data in what could be a detrimental way, really. It's just important that if we're going to be vulnerable and be open about it, that we embrace it in that way as a learning process for both the staff, the administration, the kids, and our families.
Julie?
Thank you. Thanks for the presentation and for being here tonight. Do we do this every year or every other year?
So it's going to be every other year starting next year.
Okay, but we're doing it again this
Yes.
spring, you mentioned. Okay. And do we now engage in some sort of effort to try to drive more responses so that we get more faculty, staff, and families to participate?
Yeah.
Okay. That sounds great. And then my third question for the moment is, what comes back to us next at the board level of these next steps? When do we engage again? Because I want to make sure that if I have any other questions or comments, that they're in the right scope.
Yeah. I'm happy to include it. I don't know when my next update is, but I know that when I do an update, I can give an overview of some of the school improvement plans. And each school, once the improvement plan is, it's also going to be available online and part of their website as well. So I can include it in my next update after, I'll get everything by December 31st. So by then we'll have the actual concrete steps for what their school improvement plan is at that point. And I'm happy to give an update whenever I meet and give that as part of the update. Thank you. Yeah.
Katie has her hand.
Oh, well, no, sorry, Alan, you were saying it'll be part of the quarterly update.
Oh, sorry. Yeah, it will be part of the quarterly update as part of the strategic plan, the wellness. Okay.
Thanks.
Katie?
Thank you. I wanted to follow up just on the point that Sarah raised about the big differences between our oldest students and our youngest students, and really kind of how we might understand the differing issues that, or maybe not issues, but at least ratings, feelings between elementary and say high school. So I'm curious. You mentioned, Alicia, that you would have like the plans later this year. Will you also have the raw data? Will you be able to separate like the 5 elementaries to see sort of like what is the general sense of climate from our K through 5? And is that something that might be broken out for the next report in the spring? I just feel like lumping the district in together on some of these topics is a bit difficult to really parse out where there could be, an average that maybe doesn't fully illustrate something that's going on at a particular age.
Yeah. I don't know if you want
Yeah,
to check.
Yeah, right. We are looking at district views, and you make a great point. When you get down to the school level, particularly the primary versus secondary, you're going to be able to see more nuance there, which is why we encourage the school climate improvement plans that are happening now. So there is the ability to, aggregate all of the elementaries together and look at the secondaries, or even just a couple of them if there's, a need popping up out of one particular school. So there's that ability to filter by school. Yeah.
Sarah?
Thank you. So the 3% that opted out, we had heard that there were some families that were uncomfortable because they couldn't see the survey and there was an NDA required to see it. Can you explain that, why that is, and what the thought process behind that?
Sure, yeah, that's our standard policy.
You go into the mic.
Yep, that's our standard policy for folks who are viewing the survey items to sign an NDA. We want to be as transparent as possible, which is why we do make the survey items available. The NDA is required to protect our intellectual property because it's been, the items have been refined and developed over decades just to keep that our proprietary information.
And is that standard? If there's another company that does this, do those companies do that as well?
Do other companies do
Yeah.
that as well? I can't say for certainty, specific companies as they have their own set of
Right.
policies. But yes, we do make the items available upon signature of the NDAs.
Thank you.
Dave?
Thank you. I guess following up to that point, as we think about vendor selection and other people, and we have some time before we're going to rerun the survey, do you see the center taking any steps to improve transparency for parents?
In terms of viewing the items,
That's right, without an NDA?
at this time, an NDA is required. And we continue to do that or have plans to do that for next year. However, I can take your feedback back to our team to review.
Thank you.
I will just add to that, we did have some people who came in and they looked at the survey and then said, yep, this looks fine, I'm happy to move ahead. So we had both. We had some that came in, signed it, looked at it, and we had some people that opted out beforehand, and we had some that came, previewed the items and said, this is fine, feel free to administer.
Robin, then Dennis, I see you there.
Just
after Robin.
since the data is being used to create action plans, my question really is about the students, staff, or family that did not complete a survey. And so especially on the student level, high school, basically 50% filled it out, whereas elementary schools generally had much, much higher participation. I'm just curious, if we don't have complete data, is that really going to distort the action plan or the reality of what we might need to do, and how would we improve that in the future? And that also goes for family participation, which was basically 16%, and staff 43%. So I'm just trying to understand kind of what are we missing, and how can we improve that going forward?
Yeah, and I think that's this being our first time giving it too. There's a lot to learn from that. And I think this is why this is one piece of data. There might also then be follow-up focus groups. We might talk in small groups, whether that's advisory to get additional information. So, and we also, there's great resources with regards to further outreach. So looking at and bringing our administrative team together, this particular school had really high response rate. What strategies did you use that we could generalize to other schools? So I think that it's a piece of it. And we can also then pare down the data to say, not only is it the high school, but let's look at 9th grade, 10th grade, 11th, 12th grade. That helps us say, okay, let's go back in and refocus on the 10th grade to try and get more responses because the window's open for 2 weeks. So I think we can drill down the data and see where there really is gaps where maybe we could focus more of our kind of outreach and follow up.
Thank you.
Dennis, you're up.
Thank you. Question on the improvement plan. You mentioned that each school has to do an improvement plan. And Dr. Dodd, does that go back to you? And then do you need to roll up a comprehensive plan to give to the state? And then does the state check in on said improvement plan? I mean, how does that all work?
So the actual submission of the improvement plans doesn't go into effect until next year. We're actually using this year as an opportunity. It's good practice anyways to submit it to me, put together kind of the framework, how we want it to look. And at this point, there isn't a specific point person that the data is identified as who it has to go to. They just say that we have to have it submitted to me as the point person. I think there might be more to come, I would imagine, as it gets closer to next school year.
And how do we monitor if our plan is not improving schools?
Well, I think going back to, this is one piece of the data. This is why reassessing, right? We'll set a goal. We'll gather more data next time, and this data will become, even though this is the first step, and we're going to use this as part of the process to reevaluate progress. So we're asking the same questions and looking at additional data to see if there's improvement.
You're going to add something?
And
Go ahead, Dave.
Well, I'll just say that all of these outlines of establishing climate committees, who's on the climate committee, what they have to do, that's all delineated in our bullying policy, just for perspective.
Go ahead, Dennis, and then Dave.
follow-up question. And then my other point is just, are we how, I guess, confident, maybe that's the right word, that this has been submitted in the first few weeks of school, and how confident are we that this is the true climate of the school, or is the bloom not yet off the rose? And then we'll find that out in the spring. And I guess the follow-up question is, when we do this year on year, when do we plan on participating in, when during the school year will the school climate be administered?
So these results were actually taken last spring. So it was a good way into the school year, and we'll continue to give it at the same time every year so that we're looking at the same point in time over years. So it does give some time for kids to settle in and to really get a sense of the climate. So it's not at the beginning of the year, even though the data may be presented out at the beginning of the year.
Okay, thank you.
Dave.
Thank you. I guess this is for Amanda. Alicia just mentioned, a few anecdotal people came in and said it was fine, so that's not much to rely on. But that got me thinking to the point that Robin made, that, we had low participation rates. So you guys have been doing this almost 20 years. Like, how do you guys think about self-selection bias and manage for low sample sizes, and how do you work that into your results?
Sure, right. So when we're looking at this data, right, specifically the parent pieces aren't generalizable to the entire school district. So that's when it'll be important to look at some of the subgroup information. Even for staff, some of the buildings had about half participation. So you can look at staff by role, which, for example, would be administrator, educator, paraprofessional, support staff. So you can see the number of people that responded to that particular demographic, and then see the median score alongside that as well. So if you're seeing that not a lot of educators were answering, that isn't your full staff.
And so the takeaway from that, aside from the data and seeing the low median participation rate, would be in a comment, or how would you actually note that or make, provide further information or follow up?
Sure, for the low participation rate.
Yeah.
Yeah, we would encourage, like Dr. Dad was saying, to get more information in terms of the qualitative piece from folks that are underrepresented, that doesn't mirror your actual group of school folks, to gain more information, along with not only using this data set, but again, thinking through other data sets, and even other programs, initiatives that are being tracked and managed for progress as well. So really combining data sets to get the full picture.
Thank you.
John?
Yeah, I guess following along with these participation rates, I mean, how do these stack up versus you've been doing this for 20 years? And how does this stack up with other peer districts?
Sure, yeah. So like I said, for students and staff, again, with the goal being as much voice as possible, 85 to 100%. So we're seeing a little bit lower for staff. For families, like Dr. Dad was saying too, Holmes Elementary School, if we can learn what their outreach strategies were, and perhaps replicate them among the other elementary schools, the secondary groups, that can help engage with families as well.
And then I guess I asked the administration, you look at these participation rates and there was some concern voiced about the NDA and the ability not to look at their survey in the privacy of their own home. Do the participation rates worry you? And do we lose efficacy of this whole exercise with, I mean, a 15% family participation rate is pretty dismal in my mind.
The family responses that we're seeing are actually pretty standard with other schools and districts we work with. It's really a challenge for a lot of the schools that we work with to engage with that particular population. We do have some supports in terms of outreach strategies and other supports we can offer to think through what some of the barriers are right now and what are some potential solutions and how we can support that process.
So Alicia, could you follow up with your take on it as well? I know this is the first year, but
I think there's part of that. It's a
Okay.
first year. I know sometimes too, there's a benefit to having a set time to do it. Even with some of our staff, we found that when there was a faculty meeting or when there was a set time to do it, that helps. I think that's more of a challenge for families. And we'll continue to do the outreach and identify and maybe, leave that period open. We might look at we opened it up right after a break, maybe, look at the timing of it as well. And I think also once we are able to in our, share what some of the data is, I think it also helps kind of demystify what some of the content is a little bit more, which I think could be helpful. So I think we'll have some strategies. I will say this is pretty consistent. I know even in my home district with what the parent rate is, I think part of it is the context of families are busy and it's difficult to find that time. So I think there's multiple ways of looking at how we can, get the information out more.
okay, thank you.
Mhm.
Brenna?
I think addressing the low participation rates from a student's perspective is purely logistical. In our experience, it was administered at a time in the day where it was, presented as optional, and we had it in a 26-minute period, and it was this extremely long, extremely introspective survey. And when given a choice between that and studying for the test in 10 minutes, I feel like it's pretty obvious which way most students are going to lean. So I think in terms of upping those participation rates, I agree with what Dr. Dad is saying in terms of setting aside a specific, not only a longer block, but a more prominent block of the day. Maybe we could do an extended advisory schedule, something like that. Additionally, I'm wondering if we can supplement the survey with some sort of opportunity for commentary or free response, and also a way that participants can select like their greatest area of concern. And I think that'll really streamline where we need to prioritize all of our efforts and what areas we need to focus on. And it'll additionally, prompt more feedback that, we're always looking for as a district, but we might not be getting as much as we need to because, for a lot of folks, it's so hard to bring something up. But when they're prompted, when families are prompted, when students are prompted, what is your greatest area of concern? And what can we do to help with that? So I'm just wondering if we can create an additional material that'll go with the survey.
First of all, I really appreciate your insight. That's so helpful because we have not yet come back and talked with the students. So I think hearing student voice is so important. And I think that's something we contemplated. There is an opportunity to add a question, and, we have to think about the best way, whether it's, separate from that, so we can dive a little bit deeper. Here's the structured survey, and here's some additional questions as more of like an addendum to the structured survey. I think that might give us an opportunity to hear from more students in their own words too. So I think that's something when we're looking at, that might also be a focus group. We might pull together some kids and have some conversations as well. So I appreciate that feedback. I think this would be great conversation as we go back to that school climate committee, and there's students on there too to brainstorm some ideas. So thank you.
Robin, then Julie, then I think Katie, and then I'm going to go.
And thank you, Brenna, for those comments. I wanted to just comment just kind of on an overall basis, because as I was looking at the data, just generally, we were scoring more than 3.5, which would say that the district is really in a good place. But my concern is that, especially given that we have goal number 2 in our strategic plan, which is to help increase wellness and mental health. And if you drill down into this and look even at the lowest levels of scores, I think, tending to be in the area of safety, sense of social, emotional security. And even though students had the highest rating of that compared to family and staff, again, I would go back to what would we be doing as a district? Because my fear is that, are we missing something that's not really coming through? And we could kind of say, well, we can just rest on our laurels because we got more than 3.5 on almost all of these barometers. But I think we need to kind of figure out, is there something that we didn't ask questions about, for instance, or are there areas within sense of social emotional security that we need to drill into deeper to help the students? And that kind of gets to, I think, Brenna's kind of point where, and free response is very hard to analyze because you can't really accumulate the data. But given that we have goals of trying to improve in this area and serve our students better and our families, that would be the one thing that I would love to kind of see some more action steps to think about how could we do this potentially better so we make sure that we're getting what we need to help serve our students.
Do you have a response to that, Alicia?
I agree. I think there's a balance of we want to use this data. We're taking the time to gather it, and really, even if it's just to shine a light and here's something we want to look at more, and it's a jumping off point, I think using that data and saying, just because we meet that benchmark doesn't mean, okay, therefore we're done. We have the opportunity to look a little deeper. And I agree. I think that that's really the intent of the data too.
I agree. I mean, the data, the ability to look into it is really excellent. And I was just trying to kind of look into it, like, are we missing something? And as part of the action plans, I just think it would be interesting. And again, going into the lower grades versus the higher grades, and kind of, hopefully, as you drill deeper, you might kind of see where we might have some other areas for improvement too.
Julie.
Thank you. In the interest of using the data and also encouraging more participation in the future, as people are sorting through the data on a building level, maybe it's worth looking for some kernels of information that might be used when you communicate next year, asking people to participate. These are the kinds of things we're able to glean from this research. We'd love to know more. We'd love to have your input on it. I was also just going to suggest short and sweet reminders to get people. I just did a quick check in my inbox, and I had really only full page explanations of what the survey was and how to do it. And by the time I finished reading that, I probably felt like I didn't have time to do the survey at that point. And I mean that just as a way to suggest some better reminders next time, so that people hopefully will respond.
Thank you. Katie.
Just a quick question on how you handled parents who have multiple children in the district. I'm just, as we're talking about participation rates, I know I got the survey from 2 different building principals, and I could definitely not be remembering clearly, but I wasn't quite sure like what what the expected response was from me, that I would fill them out as they were specific to that child in that building. If, is this participation rate counted by an email address or by a parent, two parents of every individual child? So if you could just clarify how you kind of calculated that percentage rate, I think that could be helpful as well.
Yeah, we received a number of students, staff, and families from each building. So that's really just, and then number of responses over that denominator pops out that percentage that's there. In terms of having two separate surveys, ideally we recommend filling out a survey for each building, as each child can have a very different experience. Whereas if you only filled out the one, your voice would only be represented in that specific data set.
So it's also possible that you heard from a higher percentages of families, but they might have they might have thought that one survey was sort of a collective response, right? That's a possibility for the rates.
In terms of communication.
I mean, I think it's good feedback, right? It was longer. I think in that email, I have to go back. I think it says for each, but as you're going through, yes, it's very possible that you might read it and think, okay, I've done it. So even highlighting that one per school, we can go back and do that.
My turn. I was curious to know, given how many surveys you do administer in other places, was there anything in our set of responses that stuck out to you as being different from what you typically see?
Sure. So looking at the district data, it is pretty on trend for what we see with other schools and districts we work with nationally. Like we've mentioned a few times tonight, looking at the specific school buildings to understand some of the nuances in terms of different perceptions across subgroups will be important, as that's where you're going to see more of the differences in terms of scores.
So there isn't anything though that stuck out?
No, not for this presentation, correct.
Okay. And then in terms of, I understand that sort of the NDA intellectual propriety side of it, but then the other sort of inverse side of that is personal data and how people feel about their personal data being used, whether it's a faculty member that says, I'm one of 32 administrators and I don't want you to know whether or not I responded because there's not very many of us, or a parent who doesn't want to answer on behalf of their family, or a child who doesn't want to answer. What can you talk a little bit more about how you handle personal privacy and the perception of personal privacy?
Sure. Yeah, so there aren't any, like I said, identifiable data on the survey. We also, if there's any subgroups that are less than 10, we don't report out on that category specifically for anonymity purposes. Those responses are subsumed up into the entire report, but there isn't a subgroup chart breakdown of what those, for example, to fifth grade math teachers, their perceptions are across those 14 dimensions. So again, less than 10 aren't responded or aren't reported rather. Also, if there is any item or demographic that staff or family aren't interested in responding to, they can skip over that and freely move throughout the survey as well.
Alicia, did that come up at all in conversations you've had around the district?
It has not. Like I said, we're just, getting into the data and sharing it out. I do believe I can go back and look, like there is some reference to that, the measures that are taken to make sure that it remains anonymous and small. I know even with the teachers, I reported out that if it's a small subgroup, that it won't be reported out to protect anonymity. But we may hear that that is a factor as we think about outreach in terms of increasing response rates. That might be.
Okay, thank you. Who's next? Sarah.
Building off of Robin's point of potentially missing something in the social emotional world, is there any potential interplay between the Thriving Youth Survey? I know that that's a different, it's more drug, alcohol, mental health based, but is there any chance to, overlay the data sets and see, I don't know, just curious about that.
Yeah, I think that this is a great opportunity to look at multiple data sets. Like when we talk about the convergence of data or discrepancies, I think this provides that opportunity. I know, for example, one of the things we looked at was, there's security and there's online related issues. And as they're getting ready to do Thriving Youth Survey, they've also added some questions around online safety. And so I think they can feed into each other to guide the questions too that we might ask. So I do think that's another data point that we have. It doesn't go down as low, and you only get the perspective, not only, you get much more student perspective without necessarily the collateral family and staff perspective. So I think it's a cohesive data set to look at.
Just on that topic, just for complete clarity, after this year, it would be the intention that the climate survey and the Thriving Youth survey would be in alternate years. This will be the sort of last year where it would be coincide on the same year. And actually, Mr. Cheney, the Thriving Youth survey reflects much the same sort of return rate for students and return rate, actually probably even lower return rate from the parent community too. So it's something I will say about the student one. I concur with it. That's an ownership of us and our administration and the building to orchestrate it where the kids could do it. And to have a better return rate in that capacity, I would take ownership for that, to be honest with you.
Okay. Any other questions or comments? So in terms of, I know you said, Alan, it would show up at a strat plan time, which is coming up. But you're not really going to be done aggregating the data until after the 31st, you said?
Yeah, that's when they'll submit their plans.
Okay. So we'd probably be talking about this again based on the master agenda in late February. And so then we would understand some of what you're planning, your thoughts are. Okay. Is everybody good with that time frame? Okay. All right. Thank you all very
Thank you
much.
both. Thank you, Amanda. Nice to see you.
Okay, discussion on July, August 2024 financial report and possible action on proposed budget transfers. Mr. Rudolph.
Let's go to the next slide. So this is the financial report through August. Through August, you are forecasting a slight deficit of 58,246. The general education RCs are forecasted at a deficit of 68,451. That is due to the loss of the Title I grant that the district receives. The Title I grant is based on a 2% threshold for age eligible children between the ages of 5 and 17 within the community, not necessarily the school district. So 2% within the town, and we fell to 1.5%. Going to the next slide. Salaries are forecasted at a positive 75,685. Turnover did fall short by 88,425. We did mention at the finance committee meeting that next month you'll see this extinguished as the savings from the new paraprofessional contract will more than extinguish that deficit. Salary savings, which is new this year, is a deficit of just under $16,000. We did also mention that given that this is a new account, we shouldn't expect to extinguish this deficit right as the school year starts. If we recall from last year, salary savings did materialize over a course of the entire school year. Long-term substitutes is a deficit of 38,000. We do have salary savings in the new custodial schedule of over 14,000. The Title I funding did cover a portion of an interventionist, and so that is a deficit of 62,000. As I mentioned, the new salary schedule for paraprofessionals has saved 153,000. Elementary intramurals are only running at homes, so that's a savings of 8,000. We have an LPN position that's not being filled as the students no longer in the district. And then we have some unfilled positions for OTs and SLPs. On the next slide, operating expenses are forecasted at a deficit of 281,500. This is primarily due to out-of-district tuition, which is a deficit of $160,000. Contracted OT, which is a deficit of 38,000, and that's because at the time we have not filled all our district OT positions. Professional development and resource materials are a deficit combined of about 63,000. And again, that's due to the loss of Title I funding. If we move to fixed expenses are a positive 147,568. We have insurance savings from the unfilled LPN position, monthly premium savings for vacant positions such as the OTs, SLP, groundskeeper, and painter. That's about 48,000. And then we have savings in payroll taxes of 22,000. And that's due largely to the savings of the new salary schedule for the paraprofessionals and custodial contracts. Moving forward, we do have 3 transfers for consideration of the board for approval. The first is for $160,000 to cover that out-of-district tuition expense that we just mentioned. We are recommending taking the funds from the savings and health insurance due to unfilled positions and monthly savings, as well as savings from payroll taxes, out-of-district transportation from ESY, and retirement from 401A vacancies. The second is for $38,000 into long-term substitutes for a leave of absence. And then finally, $35,000 for contracted speech. And again, we are covering district speech position through contracted services. And so we are recommending taking the funds from salary savings from the vacant speech and language therapist, as well as savings from ESY transportation.
Okay. Board questions. A reminder that next meeting we'll have a more there's a couple of personnel puts and takes here. We'll have a more comprehensive personnel report the next meeting. Julie.
Thank you. Rich, what's the total funding loss with the Title I change?
So it's about 150,000. We don't typically spend all $150,000 in the year. We usually carry over about 10 to kind of support that half an interventionist. So about $140,000.
Thank you.
Robin.
I just wanted to ask another question just about the overall turnover, because we talked a little bit about this more in the finance meeting, but 44 people turned over. And I mean, I was just doing a rough calculation. Is that fair to say that that's about a 5.4% annual turnover based on around 800 staff? Because last year, it seems like it was basically half of the level on a percentage basis versus last year. Is
For
that
total
correct?
staff, it is teachers, we have 480. So you're looking at a little less than 10% for teacher turnover, and then a much smaller percentage for unaffiliated and administrators.
But versus prior year.
Versus prior year, it is less. So last year, for example, we had close to 80 teachers turnover, almost double the amount that we're at now. We're still higher than we were pre-COVID. Pre-COVID, we kind of ran in the, the high 30s, mid 30s in terms of teacher turnover. So we're closer to that pre-COVID, but slightly higher.
Okay, thank you.
Anyone else? No? Okay. With that, may I have a motion to approve the August budget transfers? Is August the right month? Is August the right month?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right, sorry. Robin, seconded by Sarah. All those in favor? That's unanimous. Okay, further discussion and possible action on board master agenda for August 2024 through February 2025.
So I kept on the board's suggestions and I added the suggestion we had at the last board meeting, I kept in red, and I also added any new discussions that took place. So some of them that are in there, you can see that they're noted in red on the master agenda. So we do have things like on October 22nd, the update on the middle school and elementary schedules. You'll notice that there's updates from the various committees. If we've already identified what those updates are, in some cases it's K-3 literacy program, in other cases the professional learning communities. Whatever the topic happens to be, if we have already identified that, that is listed in the master agenda. We also have listed on the master agenda for November feedback to the board on how the K-8 mobile personal device is going forward. And you'll notice also in January, we come back to the board for the recommendation of the high school with hopefully enough time there if things are in place to actually implement it for this second semester. Those are some of the highlights of the additions.
So let's start where you just left off, that DHS personal mobile device. We thought that was coming in the fall. You've switched it back because can you just walk us through that?
Yeah, just as we map it out, there's going to be parents, staff, students, all involved in doing research. I don't want to rush this in terms of the actual process. It's not a matter of getting a couple of people around a room and having a committee meeting and that's what we're going to do. We have to talk to parents, we have to talk to staff members, kids, and do a thorough job on it. So when we mapped out the meetings, that's where it took us to. And it seemed then thereafter, I didn't want to interfere with exams and so on coming. That wouldn't be a good time to implement anything. So the natural place that it fell would be for the second semester. The November date, we did say we would do the survey in October, and so it seems sensible to, we may have to do some focus groups after that or otherwise, but we would bring that recommendation back in November.
Dave?
So quick questions, maybe slightly out of scope. I went through these items generally fine with them, but a question was prompted on the October 8th. We're discussing field trips again. If there's any appetite, this is the right time to ask on this board to throw down a look to the policy committee on the field trip policy, maybe look at some of those thresholds, since we've been having an awful lot of these discussions, and maybe they can be handled by the admin. So I don't know if there's interest to send it a policy, but I'd make that suggestion.
Okay. Why don't you attach the policy with it? And we can chat about it at the same time, as we actually look at field trips. Does that work for everyone? So we'll adjust the name of the agenda item accordingly. Yeah. Katie?
Hi, I wanted to ask about adding a presentation on the plan for the plans for the lunch service surplus and expanding the sustainable kitchen model beyond Oxbridge.
So I would ask if in consideration, if I could send a memorandum, address that in a memorandum first of all, and then a consideration of whether that's to be in a board agenda item or not.
Is that okay with you? Okay.
Thank you.
What would be approximate timing for a memorandum, just so we know when to keep our eyes up for it?
Hopeful by the end of the week, maybe attached to the agenda. And attached to the board bulletin, perhaps. This Friday.
This Friday. Okay, so an update this Friday with, and then we can decide from there. Thank you. Anyone else?
Just that there may be, and I'll ask Richard to talk to this because I didn't add it in. It came after the packet was done, was the consideration of a lapsing fund at the end of the year, of whether we wanted to do that or we didn't want to do that. Richard, if you want to talk about the dates that falls into, because ordinarily that was up to the Board of Finance, and now it's sort of up to the Board of Education.
So previously, the Board of Finance and the RTM would have to approve a non-lapsing account for the Board of Ed, and so state statute allows you to deposit up to 2% of a surplus in a given year into a non-lapsing account. The law changed, so now that the Board of Education is the determining vote. So the expectation would be to bring something to Finance Committee probably in spring. And then depending on the outcome of that committee meeting, then to the full board for a vote as to whether or not they would want to utilize a non-lapsing account. And then any surplus, should we have a surplus, would be deposited if approved into the non-lapsing.
So that's something we'd be talking about in March and April,
Probably April, May.
April, May.
Yep.
So it's not on this calendar, but
And when did that legislation change?
Just
July
now.
1st.
Oh, okay.
Cass, will you please add to the bottom of this, just a parking lot for items that we identify that don't necessarily have a date yet? So I think we have a couple of those. Okay, anything else on the master agenda? No. Okay. May I have a motion to approve the board master agenda for August 2024 through February 2025 as amended? John moves, Robin seconds. All those in favor? That is unanimous. Thank you all. Okay. Further discussion and possible action on goal 1 of the district's strategic plan board goals for 2024-2025. Dr. Adley and Dr. Finnegan et al. Are going to go through the whole presentation, plus there's a demo. You had a couple of just screenshots in the packet, but they're actually going to go through a little bit of a demo. And then I'll open it to the board for questions, just because it's hard to, even though there's a presentation, it's hard to, I think, go through too many questions until we've seen what they're actually intending. So we'll take them at the end. Also, when they get to the demo, it is my understanding that the data inside of the demo is not quite dummy data, but it isn't fully cleaned up. So we won't be talking about why is the reading score XYZ. We'll be talking about whether or not this is the kind of reading score we want to be looking at. Is this the kind of data you want to see more or less. So with that, I'll turn it over to Alan and Amy.
Thank you. So I'm not going to go through the memo in detail. I'll just talk a wee bit extemporaneously about it. You have the memo and that goes along with it. This address the Board of Education goal number 1, and it addresses the teaching and learning goal simultaneously. Just from the goal 1 of the dashboard, we're actually pretty far along with, in consultation with feedback from some board members, we're pretty far along with a model, or at least something to propose to you and for your consideration this evening. We're saying that the teaching and learning goals, that there are academic achievement indicators that go with that. And so we're going to share what some of those academic indicators are this evening. And we did take the feedback from some board members and also with administration. We added some additional indicators and academic achievement indicators. I just want to make just a couple of points, and then I'm just going to literally turn it over to Amy. You can just go to the slideshow. And Amy will just walk us through a little bit, and just do a wee demo of the actual dashboard. We agree that we need to make our learning public, inclusive, communicative, transparent. Part of that is also making the student performance transparent as well. So we're the public education system is to improve student learning. Not the only thing, but the primary purpose of public education is to improve student learning. So we should be doing what we're doing, and occasionally I'll refer to looking at the scoreboard along the way here. We would want to utilize a comprehensive framework to understand and talk about achievement across all stakeholder groups, or several stakeholder groups. In this case, we'll be identifying where we will make those assessments and also who would be involved in those particular assessments. We have identified all student groups and also our high needs students, and our high needs students fundamentally compose of ELL students, free and reduced lunch students, and students receiving special services. That would be one group that's consistent, a group that is measured by the State Department of Education too, and we would be looking at the performance of both groups. Could you just move on to that, the guiding principles, please? Because those are the most important things to me. We agree on embracing transparency and vulnerability. What I mean by vulnerability, well, when we start talking about scores and performance of students, like, it can be very interpretative, conclusions can be drawn from it. Quite frankly, it can be used against people, right? So we just have to be careful when we enter the vulnerability and the transparency of it. We just need to be careful how we use and talk about the data. That's simply it. We just need to be careful how we use and talk about the data together, collectively. Provide comparative data to DERG and state averages. One of the recommendations that we hadn't included was, you may say, well, that should have been, but since we had so much data on the table, one of the feedback was, can we include DERG and state averages? You'll see we have it included in one of the slides. It's going to be included in all the slides. This will help us as we build around coherence, and also how we describe and talk about the district, how we describe and talk about student data. I would say less is more. So we have decided our suggestion to you, grade three is a critical indicator of particularly early literacy. Then we're talking about grade 5, grade 8. Those are the achievement levels at the end of each schooling experience. And then grade 11 and grade 12, the performances of the students, and those are how they exit the school system. So instead of doing every grade level, doesn't mean to say we're not going to track and look at the performance of everybody throughout the other ones, but these are the ones that we would look at on an annual basis, and it would be also on the website through the data dashboard. So we'll be looking at the student achievement in those areas, and also the growth of our students. That's an extremely important addition that we're looking at, particularly at areas from grade 3 through grade 8. We would be looking at the academic growth of our students. We want to make sure that student A in front of you this year makes it the annual growth, learning growth throughout the year. So that was an addition. And I think it's important that we do that. And we learn how we're servicing all our students and all our students, doesn't matter where they are in the school system, what they represent or don't represent, are they making annual growth towards their own personal goals? And I'm not talking necessarily about special education. Students must feel valued by adults, not only for their academic achievement, right? Just through our discussions, I would ask is that we capture that, we value that, we celebrate that, we keep our discussion about the academic performance of the kids in context. By any stretch of the imagination, we're doing well, but it doesn't mean to say we're an organization for school improvement, right? I personally want to strive for perfection and excellence, right? And hopefully in striving for perfection, we realize sort of excellence along the way, but it's just so important. Our young people, since day one, since I entered here, that was the message, that we feel pressured and so on and so forth. So just keeping contextually that in place is important. And we must create other avenues for our students to feel celebrated and for them to demonstrate what they know and can be able to do. And that's in partnership with the Board of Education, the administration, the staff, to create those opportunities for our young people. So it's with that background that we present and sort of here's the metrics that we are considering for the board's consideration. We did add in a holistic view that includes art, graduation requirements, completion, 6-year completion at colleges, and attendance, PE. So there is a holistic, and that's called the accountability index that we have used it at an administrative level, but we've never really discussed it. It's never been part of the data discussion at the table here for the annual performance data. So with that, I'll stop talking. I'll let Amy take you a wee walk through what we're talking about.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Adley. And as Ms. McCammon mentioned, we're going to keep this kind of high level. The data is in very good shape for the indicators that we're looking at as far as grade levels and standardized achievement measures. But we are going to be presenting more data in the way of DIRG and state comparison. So that we'll look forward to sharing with you soon. Dr. Adley did mention kind of a lot of the metrics and how we've developed the framework for the dashboard. So I'll go over this piece very, very quickly. Dr. Adley has already addressed kind of the what, the when, the where, the how, and the who. But so Cass, if you can go to the next. We did select 2019 because it's a pre-COVID year, as Dr. Adley mentioned, and the most recent years for administration are 23, 24. So as you recall, districts typically get administration standardized assessment results sometime over the summer, but they're embargoed. The state is cleaning them up, and then they're released for delivery out into school districts really in September. Some of the data points that school districts are waiting for as far as the next generation accountability assessment are not yet finalized by the state. So that's why you'll see the accountability index score in 2023. So that 2024 number will be forthcoming when we have it. So who, again, grade 3 is the greatest indicator it's the greatest, most important year for literacy. So we're obviously focusing on that to the greatest extent with our district steering committee and core review team in the work that we're doing this year with pilot, et cetera. Grades 5 and 8 are end of school experiences, but those are also important years, not only because they're end of school experiences, they're also transition years. So we want to be thinking very carefully about how we use data to inform learning as we transition children from the elementary, middle to the middle school and high school, that we don't lose time as we're transitioning children from building to building. Grade 11 is when we administer the state standardized assessment for school day, SAT as it's referred to, and grade 12 is the completion of the school experience. We have many students that take assessments both in 11th and 12th grade, meaning SAT and AP. So again, these are the acronyms. We have been providing a glossary of these acronyms, and we will also in the dashboard be providing more information about what these assessments are and what they're intended to measure, how they're intended to be used. So that will be something else that we add to the data dashboard. So data dashboard, you'll see both bar and line graphs. I'm going to take you through I'm going to navigate it kind of quickly and talk with you about some of the, again, as we go, some of the enhancements that we'll make in the next iteration. A few important things to note, just as far as contextual factors, there are some limitations of any kind of achievement data. So all research would indicate that we should be looking at this data. This data should inform curricular adjustments. It should inform large scale how students are doing over grade levels and across their school experiences. But we have to also be looking at formative assessment data because it's one exam that a child sits for. So we should be triangulating data to make sure that we have a very comprehensive view. Additionally, for a large part, most of these standardized assessments are assessing discrete standards and skills. And what we're also wanting to do is make sure that we're having really rigorous and robust assessments where we're asking students to think critically and problem solve, think outside of the box. There are other limitations with regard to equity in the sense of we'll have students who come in who are identified in need of multilingual language services, and those students will be taking the test in English, the assessment in English, with a very short amount of time in the country. And that's not modified for them or provided in their language. There's data timeliness issue. Again, I mentioned before that the data is really released. We get fourth grade data from when the students were third graders last year. So we want to be triangulating other data points to make sure we know exactly where to begin with our students according to grade level standards. It is only one measurement and it does lack that qualitative piece, which is really important. And we get that when we have parents and teachers in dialogue about what we can see students actually doing with knowledge, skills, and dispositions at grade level that are developmentally appropriate for kids. So on the next slide, here's the much anticipated dip into the data dashboard.
Sign us out, sorry.
Thank you so much. Yes, just going to sign us in quickly. Believe it or not, we were in and we rehearsed this earlier, but it timed out. Okay, so go into reports, superintendent. There you go, and assessment dashboard. Thank you so much. So the first data point that we're looking at in the data dashboard is the Smarter Balanced Assessment. The next iteration will have us be able to click on that, anyone, parents and stakeholders included, be able to click on the Smarter Balanced Assessment to have more information about what is this assessment, what does it measure, and how we could interpret the results. Largely what we're looking at, as Dr. Adley mentioned, is grade 3, grade 5, 8, and 11. And we're looking at both mathematics and ELA. Those are the content areas measured in the Smarter Balanced Assessment. We are looking at both data points achievement. So that's actually where students are scoring level 1, 2, 3, and 4. And we're also looking at growth measures. So you might remember many years ago, we administered the Connecticut Mastery Test. When we moved to the SBA, part of that was to have districts not only looking at finite levels of achievement, but also growth over time for students. Because we have students starting at different readiness and developmental levels. So we're looking here at ELA. You can see grade 3 whole group. And then on the yellow, ELA is grade 3 students who are identified in the high needs students group. Those students that are also meeting and exceeding the levels that you would look to see for levels 3 and 4 on the assessment. We're again looking at years 18, 19, pre-COVID, 23 and 24 because they're the most recent years. It's important to note that the pink bars, which are grade 3 students, those are inclusive of all learners, including the students that are identified as students who receive support services or who are in high needs. If you click to the next over to the right, you would see grade 3 students for mathematics, reading it the same way, all students, those students who are represented in the high needs group. If there is a data point missing, it's simply because there may be a suppressed group because the number of students is so small. So the state actually suppresses that data. If you continue on, you'll see the same pattern for grade 5 and grade 8. You might notice that there was not growth data for grade 3 because the first time our students take that assessment is in grade 3. So the first year we can show growth, of course, is grade 5. Continuing on. Grade 8, same thing, ELA and math, and then next, grade 8 as well. Okay, and then this is where we would get to the students that are hitting their growth targets. So the state predicts a growth target, which is what the student is meant to achieve in 1 year of school time. And so this would be the percent of students that are in the whole group of students that are achieving their growth targets. And then on the right, the students that are identified in the high needs group that are achieving their growth targets. And again, for ELA and mathematics, and the reason why there are 2 bars is because there are not growth targets for grade 3. Okay. And the same thing for grades 5 and 8 for achievement and growth. All right, next is next generation science assessment. We'll only
Can I
see,
just reiterate to you there,
Sure.
there'll be another click there where you can go underneath each of those charts and it'll be delineated what it is and what the KPI is and what are we actually looking at there. So just for clarity.
thank you. And so if we look at next generation science achievement, it's grades 5, 8, and 11 when that's administered. There is not a growth target set for this assessment because it's administered only during those 3 discrete school years, but we'll be reporting out on whole student population for achievement and also achievement of our group of students that identified that are high needs receiving supports. For SAT, typically we would report out in the achievement report, which we'll be giving on October 8th, the average score. This is the school day SAT. So this is the state standardized assessment that our students in grade 11 must take. Many students, most students here in Darien are taking that assessment on more than one occasion, but we're reporting out average score for grade 11 ELA and math. And on the next slide over, we're reporting the same information, but for our students identified in the high needs group. Below this, I believe we have AP next. So another College Board assessment. We typically would report out on the student count by year and the exam count, noticing that those numbers can be different because most of our students are taking more than one AP exam. And on the next page, you'll see the levels of students who achieve at levels 3, 4, or 5, which is typically what districts report out on for AP. Okay, and then the seal of biliteracy. This is a fairly new assessment in the state of Connecticut. And what we're reporting out on here is the number of seniors who have earned the seal of biliteracy. Students can actually earn the seal previous to 12th grade, but we report out on students that earn it by 12th grade. So this is the number of students that have earned the seal and the number of languages that are represented. So again, to earn the seal, our students need to demonstrate proficiency in 2 languages, English and one other language, which may be their native language, heritage language, or a language learned in school. And the next indicator is what Dr. Adley was referring to. This is the accountability index. This is meant to be, kind of to tell the story of how a school and district are performing against 12 indicators. Those 12 indicators include ELA and mathematics, which include the state standardized assessments we've just reviewed, things like chronic absenteeism, Connecticut physical fitness assessment, access to the arts. This index is provided pretty late into the fall by the time all of those different areas are reported and given back to districts from the state. So we're looking at their Darien, Durg, and state comparisons over those years. And each of the 12 indicators is weighted a little bit differently. And that's how the state ends up determining what the accountability index is. And so, of course, it's important to also look at that year over year. Next. That's it for the data dashboard, but if we can just go back to the other slide deck. Thanks, Cass. Okay, so next step, some things that we would be talking about as a board and as administration would be how might the data dashboard be used to inform other areas of the work if we think about other board goals and areas in the strategic plan? What ways might we disaggregate the data and how might that data be shared? Where will the data dashboard be housed and how might it be accessed, again, to increase transparency with our stakeholders? This is a very important one. What other data sets and sources of data might be useful to be included in a portfolio? It's incredibly important when we think especially about universal design for learning that we provide multiple pathways for children to demonstrate what they know and can do. Right? That's incredibly important. When you think about what each of you do out in a corporate setting or out in the business world, you're not often responding to a standardized measure, right? You're putting all the pieces together in your performance. So that's incredibly important. And we're also thinking about, again, what metrics might be used for other areas of district operations. We've talked a bit about technology. I know we added that in the last meeting, I believe, to the same board goal 1. That is what I have for the data dashboard.
Okay, I'll open it to board questions or comments. Katie.
Thank you. I have a lot of questions. First, I'm really curious about the resources that are being dedicated to this. what the cost of this is in terms of hours put into this, dollars spent. This seems pretty intensive. And to that point, I do recognize and acknowledge that there are still next steps to be developed, but quite a bit has gone into this already. And I'm struggling to understand a little bit better, like how we plan to use this and what new information or insights it will give. It seems to me that a lot of the things that we just went through are things that the administration has been reporting out for a long time to the board, and that this is sort of, a new wrapping that I'm concerned is going to take a lot of resources. And then I also wonder a bit about, some of the redundancies, not just that we report out on these and that we have things, but, how does or doesn't this relate to EduPlanet in terms of making learning public? There are quite a few limitations that have been acknowledged, and how we address those things. Some of this seems to, kind of be in opposition to a lot of the talking points that I've heard for a number of years since being in the district. I don't think I've ever gone to an elementary, beginning of the year coffee without being like implored to please remember that testing is a snapshot in time and is not representative of a whole child. I do appreciate, thank you, Dr. Adley, for mentioning that there are other elements that you're trying to weave into this, but I'm curious about soft skills, about writing, grammar, spelling, some of those things that we have been asking questions about for a while and unable to contextualize. Again, coming back to some of the things that you hear in elementary school, there's been a reluctance of teachers to ever kind of respond to that common question in parent-teacher conferences of like, where does my kid rank in their class? Teachers hate that question and they do not want to tell you. And I would be curious if anyone has ever gotten something that, they're in the middle. But SBAC already reports that out anyway, right? Like those scores just came out this week and they tell you like, this is where your kid did, this is where your kid did last year. This is how the whole district did. Like, this is the state average, whatever it is. So I'm curious about a lot of these things. And my final point is, and maybe Shirley or Amy, whoever's best to address this, the high needs category definitely makes me pause. I'm curious if that is including every student that has an IEP, a 504, every student that's receiving services, or if it's taking into account the why. Like, for example, if a student, let's say, gets support in math, but is exceptional in language arts, are their scores still going to be reflected in a high needs category?
So yes, Katie, the high needs includes all students with those three areas, students with IEPs, students who have free and reduced lunch, and students who also are ML students, or ELL, as we formally refer to students who are not native English speakers. The state groups that cohort together, we don't, nor would we necessarily, but it's how the state reports out on those standardized scores.
So this is part of the portfolio of how we manage our database. We do have a consultant we have had for years who does a lot of the data for us. So we have a website that does that behind the scenes. So that is part of his actual charge to do that. So we're not anticipating a fee for it. I will politely remind you that the board asked me to do this, right? So it was the board who asked for metrics. I came up with what the metrics I thought were reasonable, and also sort of like try to do a 360 of it. We are going to try and do from vision of the graduate and so on and so forth. But yes, some of these have been reported out. Others have not been, both the high needs, the accountability index, and all the individual indices that go along with that. And that's why it's so important to keep it within context. But this would be something that we could show. Where would it be? It would be on the website, and we could show our progress on a yearly basis. So that addresses some of, Katie, your questions.
David and Julie.
Thank you. I thought this was a great kickoff introduction. I know we have a long way to go. So thank you for the look behind the scenes, if you will. And I guess my only thought is, as we make information like this public, as the EduPlanet work continues and is concluded and becomes public, I think really having this all together and providing that for parents to see in one place and spend the time to go through it to the extent they want is really a great mission of the district to be able to help the transparency there and give that access. So nice to see this getting started. Thank you.
Julie. I agree. This feels like a lot kind of all at once. So it's a lot to process. I am curious who the audience is or the intended user and how we intend them to use it. Although from your comments just now, Dr. Adley, maybe it sounds like we intend to push this out to the public. I'm not sure on what its intended use is, so it's hard to react to it for that reason. And I don't know how much appetite there is for this. I don't know, but it looks like it's quite far along. So I'm interested in thoughts on that. The guiding principles, probably something I would have loved to have had a conversation on before we got to this level of execution, to be perfectly honest. I have questions on a number of them, but I won't go through them all at the moment. I guess the biggest two things I would say right now, there's a long list of limitations and things that are important to note. And to my way of thinking, we need to have a list that's so much longer that says why this is worthwhile and all the wonderful things it's going to bring us in order to reconcile that balance. And I don't see that right now, which brings me to my last point is I didn't take much, if anything, away from how this helps improve student outcomes. And so without any of that, I don't know what the why is.
So, go ahead.
Go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I agree with a lot of what Katie and what Julie are saying, but I think as a board, we had discussions in light of the strategic plan and our goals to be able to track on an ongoing basis how we are achieving those goals. And it was my understanding from Dr. Adley and the administration that many of these measures that have been presented are things that they already are tracking and reporting on. And the desire here was to just basically put all of that data into basically a dashboard that would be in one place that would be easily accessible so that the board could use it on a quarterly basis as a monitoring tool in terms of how we're achieving the goals of the strategic plan. But then if parents wanted to look at it, it could be available on the website. And it's basically metrics about how you're doing. And I think I agree in terms of guiding principles. I think the most important, in my mind, the most important point about why you would even do this is so that it can allow the board in an oversight role to work with the district and the administration to help identify areas where maybe we're not completely achieving the goals that we set out to achieve as a board or in the strategic plan. And then where would we want to further drill into to try to adjust? And I note in curriculum and teaching and learning, they are using this data to do that. But I think it's helpful from a board oversight perspective to have the board members be able to see this on a quarterly basis and holistically look at that. And one more thing, I think in terms of this was just goal area 1, because I think the administration wanted to look at that specifically, but the intent would be also to make a more holistic tracking dashboard that also takes into account, for instance, goal number 2 of strategic plan about how are we helping with wellness and mental health. Goal number 3, how are we achieving the goal of the vision of the graduate and allowing different pathways to what we consider to be student success. And I think all of those pieces have not been added into this sample data set, but those are incredibly important to kind of balance out what right here is basically standardized test scores for the most part. So, I mean, I would view this as basically a first step at creating kind of a dashboard that hopefully is not a lot of additional administrative work, because that is absolutely not the intent. It would be that it would allow us as a board to help with what, at the end of the day, we have to evaluate, which is, are we achieving and are we helping to achieve growth in student achievement? And that would not only be on the academic side, but also in mental health and wellness and vision of the graduate, all those competencies. And are we allowing those pathways to success? Not just individual students, but their growth along all cohorts. And I think this would help us to achieve what we need to do as a board. That's just my view, but hopefully we can take a step at it in this first iteration.
Dave and then Sarah.
So I guess almost a point of information, Alan, you said that you had a consultant doing this already. And so you weren't even expecting a bill here. Cass, when you logged in, I noticed that it timed out, seemed like you went into something that was already built. So is there building going on behind the scenes to create this dashboard for us tonight? Or were you simply granting the board access to a system that's already built and you're using, or a portion of that systems?
Well, I'll answer a couple of questions, if I don't mind. I'll ask someone of the, or Julie, what's the audience? Well, the audience is the board, first of all. I need to, the board asked me to do this, right? So let's forget that a little bit. You asked me to come up with metrics for teaching and learning, and I am okay with doing that. But we have to keep the thing in context. The whole movement of education is actually away from standardized test data and so on and so forth, right? So you have to be, but at the same time, we're a learning organization. I'm okay looking at perform. We use this performance behind the scenes, right? Working with our staff in terms of PLC teams, professional learning together, the interventions for kids. We do all that. So it's just critically important that we just keep our understanding of it and our context of it. I have no problem sharing it with, if you're going to have a discussion here about it, I think we should share it with our community, right? But it's all in the way that we discuss it and in the way that we use it. Regarding this particular piece of software, this is being built on a platform just behind the scenes that will come live on the district website whenever we feel that we're ready and we agree on the metrics that we're going to look at. Things like color, presentation, we're going to have to still do some things there. But the work that's being done right now is already part of what the actual person actually does and is responsible for.
So there's a database underneath it that we already have. You've just built some reporting on top of it. And
For
basically,
the dashboard on top
yeah.
of it, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I guess, yeah, I didn't, was there a build on top, or was this just exposing certain things that the admin has access to we hadn't seen previously?
I don't know what the technical term for it is, David, in terms of whatever you would say. The data was there, right? The data was there, right? You just built the actual
Reporting.
Just the reports.
Thank you.
Sarah.
So I hear everybody's points about this is a, and I have said this 100 times at this table, this is a point in time. This is not how we should measure an entire child. So I think that second bullet point from the bottom, what other data sets and sources might be included for a more comprehensive view is potentially the most important question. If we're going to put this out to the public, how do you illustrate what an entire child is and how they are progressing and what targets are we putting on them? That accountability index seems like it has some of those. Is that able to be parsed out or no?
Yeah, so the state does provide data points, points earned and percentages for each of those 12 areas.
Okay.
So we would have a discrete, we would know how many points we've earned and our percentage of earned points, for example, with Connecticut Physical Fitness Assessment or with access to fine arts or on track for graduation.
Right. So, I mean, I think just thinking of that, like if you could parse each of those 12 out, I think that would help to maybe, that to me is the only measure that's included in this dashboard that is at least quasi comprehensive, I mean, what else could you, the whole point of measuring numbers and kids, like it's tricky, it's messy. And I don't know how you create a complete dashboard with numbers. And I don't know how you do it. So.
Well, you don't, we just have to be careful that we're not talking about widgets here, right?
Absolutely.
I would actually much prefer spending my time having us do assessments around those attributes of the vision of the graduate, to be honest with you. But But
For
this is a
example-
part of our work.
Oh, I'm sorry, Dr. Adley.
No, you're good.
I was gonna say, we, for example, will be sending students off to participate in debating with Model UN. That's not something that's measured on a standardized assessment, but a student being able to take a position and articulate that position and win a debate is a very important skill, right? And that allows a student to pull together not only standards, like content area standards and facts, skills, but also dispositions for how do you communicate. So we have to look, standardized assessments are incredibly important. They're one measure we should be looking at. But those other opportunities, like when you have a student who is president of a club and demonstrating leadership, that's another, we have to be thinking about some of these are quantitative measurements and some are more qualitative.
Right.
And all are important.
Yeah.
When we think about, students that are applying to colleges or thinking about college and career, we need them to be able to dememonstrate both knowledge, skill, and disposition.
And I'm thinking like behavior too. If we're talking about our SRBI for behavior being part of our curriculum, how do we measure, like there's just all sorts of different areas that should be included that I just don't know how you illustrate that in a graph.
Dave, then Julie, then me.
Thanks. Yeah, I guess just following up on Amy's point and a little bit Robin's, I mean, this to me is a start, and I know you can't measure an entire child with data, but for us as a board, as the oversight, if we start to see what is in EduPlanet, we start to be able to measure results here. If we had OpenGov or some other tools like that, and we're able to put that out as a dashboard, gives us the ability to really manage and see the whole piece. I know you're not going to get everything. Your thought, Amy, about somebody goes to Model Congress and does a great job there because they pull together the pieces. Probably is it possible in the next 4 or 5 years we could just have that running open? You could have OpenAI summarize and take away the key points and tell you why they actually demonstrated certain skills and models in that presentation. Yeah, so maybe that's something we're able to add some few years down the line. Not unbelievable, but again, this is a great start. This is something we haven't had this kind of a data and this ease of access. So I applaud the effort and us getting this started and look forward to improving it.
Julie.
So yes, understanding what we're saying, that this is a start. So I would agree that there's work that needs to be done. As I've said all along, I think this makes an oversimplification of trying to present who our students are and what our students do and are capable of. So that's a big concern. I think calling it a dashboard suggests that you have all the information that you need to know what you're doing and what you're up against. And right now we don't have that. It also sounds like some of the descriptions of what people are talking about, it could be or should be or might become, just sounds like a really robust website, quite honestly, that's perhaps more sophisticated and a little glossier than what we have at the moment. So I'm just throwing it out for consideration. But my question at the moment is, who has something like this that we like? What are we looking at as whether maybe not even in our industry, but is there anything out there that's a really great example? I looked and
Well, most districts don't do this. In all honesty, most of the districts, certainly not under DERG, would not be doing this level of profiling the achievement the way we're suggesting doing here. Look, listen, business does it all the time, right? That's why we've had the KPI acronym, right? Which we just have to be careful about too a little bit. But there's not many districts are out there profiling. Now there are some with their, in fairness, their strategic plans. They'll build in achievement, and if you dig into their strategic plans, you'll find it there somewhere. They're not as profile as our district, but also a lot of them, like honestly, when we do the strategic plan, they may or may not be following it. All right, so if it was somewhere, it's generally on their strategic plan, because generally student achievement is on the strategic plan somewhere.
Before I go, perhaps you guys might talk a minute about the state and what the state looks like, because a lot of this is available like in EdSite and at the state level. I mean, I think that what we're attempting to do here is create a local look at what we're interested in focusing on, but I think this data is all aggregated already at the state level for all of our districts now.
Exactly what you said. Yes, it is. Yes.
Okay. So what the board is really doing here today is just taking a look at this as a representative of goal one, of the teaching and learning goal. So the purpose of this was not to, as multiple people have said around here, there's much more to go if we were actually trying to capture a student. At the moment, we're really trying to take a look at that teaching and learning goal and apply some metrics to it so that we can evaluate it at the end of the year. That's all we're trying to do. It's something that can be developed over time, but these are the primary metrics that are used at state level. We weren't using a number of them before. So we've expanded the data set that we're using, and we're trying to make it explicit for the work that we're doing. And so that's what the board is looking at tonight. The purpose is to take a look at the goal. Is the data that we are evaluating more or less matching up to what we want to use in order to track goal one? There will, of course, be other things that we track, including work that is produced over time, and other types of sort of like milestone type performances, but milestone type objectives. There might be other performance data. And certainly, I think as a goal, we would have, as a board goal, we would have expanding how we look at other different forms. We just looked at the climate data a few minutes ago. I mean, clearly we are trying to balance in all areas of our work with students, how we apply quantitative and qualitative measures. So I would say that for discussion tonight, ultimately, we're just looking to vote on the goal. If there are specific things that people want to provide in feedback to further develop the dashboard, we absolutely can do that going forward. So
I will make just one connection between curriculum and so on. It may well be under some of these descriptors because there's the drop down. For example, you may say this is the year on the reading that we established the new reading program. And therefore, going along, you see whether we're progressing or whether we're not. So there's things that we can do with it. And not absolutely.
John.
So I'm very excited to be a leader on this front as a district in the state. And I think you guys have done tremendous work in trying to present it, again, with the appropriate warning that we have to put all this data in context. But the data exists. It's presented. I see the school climate survey being weaved in here and some of the data we went through in the class of, the previous class of 2024 and where they're headed in their lives. I do want to say, I mean, we went through a whole school climate survey, as Jill just said, and we're trying to put metrics behind some very, very subjective measures. And so I see nothing wrong as long as we are very clear with the full context of what we're trying to do here.
Also, just a note, there was an EdSite presentation that CABE gave, I think, 5 or 10 days ago, that people might be able to get access to if they want to see how the state's using some of this data. Did I see another hand? Katie?
I had a clarifying question. It's been mentioned several times that the board asked for this, and my memory was that there was a recent meeting where a few people sort of volunteered for less formal than subcommittee work, but to take on, like, I myself was going to begin drafting some internal documents for a board handbook and onboarding of new materials. And my understanding that there were a couple of members who were interested in data and were going to speak about, what that might look like in terms of, so if I missed something where there was a more formalized agreement of the entire board to get to this level tonight, I would love to be pointed in that direction. But I can say I'm certainly surprised that from that sort of informal happening at the board table that we arrived at this place tonight.
I think it's probably important to distinguish between some board members who had points of view on wanting more data and administration. I think the conversation that we had at the last board table was that their board was having difficulty translating between the KPI that was written at the top and how it might be used. And so, yes, there was a group who were interested in the use of data, but I think that part of why we have something more concrete in this case is so board members could understand what would probably be used, as opposed to just a look at 3, 5, 8, and 11 and 12.
So the message to me has been from this board that you want the data around this and you want the data measurement, which is fine, right? It comes in this shape because honestly, we worked as hard as we could to try and get something so we could try to bring this to closure a little bit and try to move it forward. So we tried to, like, we shouldn't be even as far along in the dashboard to try and sort of like bring it to life a little bit and give some discussion around it. And, so I think we're further along in many ways than we even anticipated being. But this is a discussion for the board whether you want this or not. But this is what I'm thinking, and I'm happy to support what I've suggested here, but with some reservation about
Sarah.
it.
So I don't necessarily think there's anything wrong in being transparent and putting, data in front of parents and stakeholders. But I would love to get your ideas, Alan, Amy, Shirley, whomever, of what else could be included in a dashboard to be, what else would we be putting in a very public space, and how would that, it's hard to know what a complete, how you illustrate a complete picture. But to me, this is not, I don't want this public yet, because this is just, this to me reads, we only care about standardized testing, and that's not what we're talking about at all. So I don't think anyone at this table would agree with that. So I guess going next steps, Jill, like, we're approving this goal tonight.
Yeah,
We're not approving this
We're not.
dashboard, so I think we kind of have to separate the two things.
Correct. I would agree with that, Sarah. So we're approving the KPIs. So you've seen the dashboard. That tells you what the KPIs we're looking at, which ones we'd be applying, whether or not, agreed, Sarah, whether or not that shows up on the website as a dashboard, it can certainly be a different discussion. So I think for the purposes of tonight, if you are relatively comfortable with that use of data for the evaluation of Goal 1, again, with the understanding that that's just a dashboard, there are other metrics embedded inside of Goal 1 already that we've been looking at for a couple of iterations. We're just looking for approval or not of Goal 1. We can certainly have another look at the dashboard and talk about that in more detail at a future time. Yes, Katie.
So I just want to clarify the connection between these two and what we are voting on tonight. Because even if we're not discussing particularly this dashboard and its future use, there does seem to be a line drawn that the way that we are evaluating teaching and learning is through standardized testing.
Well, there's the whole goal with a bunch of different metrics in it. These are the KPIs listed at the top, but there's a number of metrics.
Well, I guess I would say the fact that this one goal was singled out and kicked to the next meeting, and we've now had a lengthy presentation and discussion on this, does make it seem as though this is the top priority and measure, which, again, coming back to like what we put out, what we value, and messages that we're sending to students, right?
But aren't you the one that says we're the ones who need to have teachers in the classroom because education is our primary output? That's what we do. Teaching and learning is our primary job.
I'm sorry, I fail to see the connection of your point.
Really?
Yeah.
Teaching and learning, this is our first goal because it is one that we've identified. I'm surprised that it isn't a priority to you at this
I'm
stage.
not saying that it's a priority. I'm asking, I'll state my question again because it sounds like you didn't get it the first time. I'm asking about whether or not tonight's discussion and presentation on the dashboard is saying that the way we measure Goal 1, enhancing teaching and learning, is largely dependent on the results of standardized test scores.
There's a series of metrics inside of the goal. Have you gone through it?
Jill, yes.
Okay, great. So you are concerned. What metrics would you like added then to that goal?
I'm simply stating the point that I'm concerned on an over-reliance on standardized test scores.
Point noted, but it's not enough to say, I don't like it. You need to come with what you want. Brenna.
I think to address sidestepping the qualitative concerns for a moment, I think from a quantitative perspective, there's still more specificity that we can gain from tracing where students are coming from and they're achieving these higher scores. Are they coming from an honors class? And I think that's where we might be finding some of those intersections with learning and with teachers is through where are they coming from?
Yes.
Which teachers are they coming from? I think that's where, to my understanding, we'll be finding those connections. But I just, in congruence with what Mrs. Best was saying, I think if our goal is to get closer to using these numbers as a unit, not the unit, as a unit, then I think we do need to move limitations of the achievement data instead of a note to a guiding principle. And we need to facilitate a very, very rich discussion about how are each of these factors directly impacting student performance. Who's getting tutored? Who's not taking the SAT? Who's taking the ACT? Who wasn't in school that day? Who, if you were like me, when the SAT school day happened, we had that earthquake and we lost 25 minutes on the test. And that was the lowest I've ever scored. We need to be discussing, not only just noting, but we need to be fully discussing, fully expanding how each of those points directly impacts. And I think that'll be able to address not only the concerns about, well, these numbers aren't the be all end all, but additionally the concerns about, the gray areas between groups. I mean, we know that high need students aren't, high need students does not dictate low performing students. We know that. So in order to, really, I guess, cross all of our T's, I think number one, there's more specificity to be gained with the quantitative data as it stands. And then secondly, we need to really evaluate and really discuss all those guiding principles.
Thank you. I think that's a great plan.
Just summarize a wee bit there. My takeaway from that is, Brenna, that the data, one of the value purposes of the data is simply allows you to ask more questions. And that's what we do with it.
Okay. May I have a motion to approve Goal 1 of the Board of Education Goals and Strategic Plan for 2024-2025? That's John, seconded by Dave. All those in favor? That is Maroney, Best, Brown, Lublin, Sini, McCammon. It's a unanimous parent, Nelson. Okay. Thank you all. Personnel report, Dr. Adley.
We have 5 personnel appointments and resignations. One appointment for the occupational therapist. That leaves us, I believe, 1 occupational therapist still vacant at Toganeek. We still have 1 district-wide speech pathologist that we are looking for. We have a para-educator appointment. And then we have 3 resignations. 1 for Mark, who is DHS custodian, is on his retirement. Sarah is an itinerant elementary art teacher. She has left us to take a new position up in New Canaan. And Jennifer, a Royal speech educational paraprofessional who has resigned.
Thank you very much. Okay. In terms of follow-up action items, there were some questions from Greg that he sent in advance of the meeting that if they weren't covered, you were going to follow up, Alan. There's a memo in the cafeteria, and Cass is adding a spot at the bottom of the master agenda for items that don't fit on the master agenda, but that we don't want to lose. Any other action items that I missed? Okay. Public comment.
Good evening. If anyone in person or online would like to participate in public comment, please come up to the podium or use the raised hand icon and wait for the chair to recognize you. Please state your name and address for the record, and you will have up to 3 minutes to comment. Please note your time with the chair. We have no raised hands at this time.
And no one online?
No.
Okay, thank you. May I have a motion to adjourn? That's Julie.